Welcome to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan Gorse, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful journey of remembering our divine nature and tapping into the truths that shall set us free. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Heal with Kelly podcast.
You gotta keep that in.
I'm with the stand-up comedian, Pedro Crone. No, my good friend, Peter Crone, who is always so funny.
So funny boy.
You know Peter Crone from Heal. Now his own, fame on Instagram and Mastermind and setting people free all over the globe. Mm-hmm. You're a special human. Thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you, my dear. So good to see you. Thank you for letting me be a clown.
It's the best. We all need the laughter more than ever these days, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess I'll read your bio for those of you who are new and don't really know Peter. I call him Pedro.
Pedrito.
Peter, we'll maybe get into some of his personal life story, but Peter works with everyone from world-class athletes to stay-at-home parents to redesign the subconscious mind. We exist within limiting mental constructs that dictates our thoughts, feelings, actions, and the results and reality we experience. Peter helps people and groups step outside of the world as they know it by identifying mental constructs that have been holding them back. Peter's work explores the fundamental issues that affect us all to foster a deeper understanding of our common humanity. Peter is a writer, speaker, and thought leader in human awakening and potential, and he shall set you free. Welcome.
Amen. I would like to sit down with that guy.
Yeah. So I've had the pleasure of working with you since before I made Heal.
Yes.
And while we've chiseled and excavated so many layers of my constructs, and I've experienced such profound freedom and moments of just like presence and full embodiment of me. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's just like a never-ending process. I'm still not free, Peter.
Damn it.
I think I just need you every day in my head.
Wait, is this a good sales pitch for me
I
or
know.
not? It's not working.
It's not working.
Yeah.
No, but in all honesty, it's like once you undo that construct, once you put the light of awareness on it, working with you, and you have that shift, you can't ever go back, I don't think. So it's subtle, but so profound. It's
subtle, and I think, you can't unsee something that is so profound when you see it, right? And it's that moment of like when you learn balance and you're riding a bike, sometimes people sort of refer to that as an analogy. It's like, oh, I got it. Now, does that mean all of a sudden you're going to compete in the Olympics or do the Tour de France or, be a motocross X Games gold medalist? No, like there's levels, right? So I think even with the stuff that we're both so passionate about in terms of what I call that spiritual ascension or of evolution of who we really be to tap into the timeless, limitless nature, it's a mountain without a top, right? So Peter Crone is always a work in progress himself. I just fortunately happen to be slightly more at the bow of the boat than most so that I can actually impart some wisdom, but I'm always working on stuff. So the fact that you feel that, I think, is both a testament to your commitment to constantly wanting to evolve, but also just to give yourself acknowledgement for how much you've already evolved. Mm-hmm. It's the never-ending opportunity that it is to be a human, to keep tapping into different aspects of ourselves. So yeah.
And Mind Architect, and I just read the bio of redesigning the subconscious mind and removing the constraints.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to assume that people know as much as I know about your work. So I just want to reiterate, like, at the basic level, talk about these constructs, these prisons within our mind, and what you do to help people break free.
Sure. I mean, anyone, even if they're not familiar with my work at all, like, you're going to, just by virtue of being human, you're going to have your trials and tribulations, right? We could assert that being human is synonymous with suffering to varying degrees. There's like the gamut from, the real tragic experiences that many of us go through from different times of our human arc, and then there's sort of the more mundane stuff of like, you know, the husband hasn't fixed the fucking garden gate for the last few months, you know, but it's irking at you. And so there's still some, like, something that people can relate to is just, as I said, just being human and what we might call everyday problems. And so what I'm helping people understand is sort of to reverse engineer what we perceive as a problem to actually seeing what is the genesis of that form of suffering. And it's my assertion that really everything is generated from the way that we look at things, not from the things themselves. One of the big distinctions I got for myself very early on in my life was that I'm not a victim of circumstance, but rather I'm a victim of my perspective of circumstance. And that, you know, a lot of people sort of get a little discomfort there because they're like, well, shit, if you knew my circumstances, you realize I am a victim, you know, and there's some abhorrent things that happen out there at the extremes. But it's still, the suffering is the byproduct of how we're interpreting something versus itself being where the suffering exists. And that at least starts to be an empowering conversation. Because if you think that you really feel shitty because of your boss, or you feel lousy because of your parents or your spouse, well, now you've handed over your domain of power to something outside of you, which is a very hopeless feeling. So really I'm helping through whatever people are dealing with in everyday life to reverse engineer that into, okay, well, what must be the perspective you have that creates, not only attracts the circumstances, but also gives rise to the feeling of dis-ease about it. And if that obviously happens over time, the continuum means it usually cascades into your physiology. So now you might have a sickness that you're dealing with as a disease. But again, I would assert that it starts with the way that you're interpreting something, that you're a victim of something, that creates suffering. And then that over repetitive days, months, and years can start to become like a real condition, like a chronic condition, whether it be psychological, physiological, or otherwise. So I'm really dissolving, my catchphrase is, you know, I don't solve problems, but dissolve them. Whatever the fundamental prison is of the subconscious, which is the foundational layer of somebody's persona or their identity, so that those constructs and prisons really give rise to the thoughts that people are aware of, the feelings they have, the actions they take, and consequently the results they get. And if you look in everyday life, most of the experts people speak to, they function in the domain of behavior, right? So you go and see an expert for whatever it is. It could be a sport, it could be a relationship, it could be your business. And it's in the realm of doing, like, don't do this, do that. But in the cascade that I just presented, you know, actions are a byproduct results are a byproduct of action. So it seems to make sense that, well, if I change what I do, I'm going to get different results. And it may short term. But if you don't look at the feelings that generated the behavior and then the thoughts behind the feelings or associated with the feelings, and more profoundly, the subconscious prisons that give rise to all of it, then you're hitting your head up against the wall.
So just to bring all that down into a perfect example, I usually would use my life circumstance, but I'm going to resist that for a minute because too many tears have been shed. And I don't want to play the violin here. So I was in your mastermind, which are extraordinary. And I encourage anybody who wants to have access to your work just to dive in and invest in themselves in that way and work with you, because it is life-changing.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's the woman who has scoliosis and back pain her whole life. And you could walk through this, but essentially exactly what you just said. She was a witness to her dad beating the shit out of her mom. Her mom's crying for her. She's a young girl. She wakes up startled, gets in between the most terrifying circumstance of her life. Yeah. And ever since then has had tension in her back, scoliosis, developed into scoliosis, and pain and all of the things. And she developed this view of life, that life is unsafe or life is dangerous, which then dictates all those thoughts, feelings, actions. And results in her life. And you shifted everything walking through this process, and it was profound, and also doubly profound for me because, and you could talk about it so that people can get the what went down, what unfolded. But I have scoliosis, and I was like, I wonder, I always thought like, well, maybe it was like a birth injury, or maybe I was dropped on my head, or you know, whatever it is. And I'm like, oh, there's some correlation. There's some correlation there.
Yeah, I can see that.
And just really interesting.
Yeah.
So talk to us about what you did there.
So that was so fun and very powerful. And again, I just want people to understand that these seeming miracles, you know, like it's in any business, we're always going to, by default, present the best case scenario, right? Like you might be at home, someone's sitting there watching this, or they might be entertaining going to a conference, or they're going to buy a product on TV, or they're buying a supplement. You're only going to hear about the great shit, right? Like, so I also just want to, as a disclaimer, say that whilst I know what I do and the miracles that happen in the thousands, you know, especially through the mastermind, that 3-month container is so powerful, the miracles that just seem to happen every week. But, you know, for people out there who do have scoliosis, and, you know, I don't want them to get sort of false hope that you can just sort of wave a magic wand. But so it's just sort of a disclaimer, and to also embrace our humanity. But with this particular woman, the first thing that I did to help her was to disassociate a word from an experience. Right. So she had collapsed. I have scoliosis with, hence ipso facto, I have back pain. And so why that's important is because she at some point has gone to see a doctor, got an x-ray, whatever, a chiropractor, and they've diagnosed her as having scoliosis. So what happens is it's very similar when people get the diagnosis of cancer. The number of people to the millions of people who have had cancer, even as a diagnosis, who, you know, they go through whatever they go through. They take the traditional, you know, horrific chemos and radiations, or they do their own naturopathic kind of approach and they do coffee enemas or whatever it is that they do, right? And they become fine. So we want to start to disassociate these sort of fatalistic prescriptions with a word. So the first thing I said is, okay, well, if you have scoliosis, I understand what that means as it relates to the actual anatomy of your spine, but do you always have pain? And she said, well, no, I don't. I said, okay, great. So that's the first thing, to start to just create a little bit of space, right? Doesn't mean that because you have scoliosis, you have pain. And her issue isn't the word scoliosis. The issue is pain. So the pain comes and goes. Great. So let's just put scoliosis to one side. And now you can say, I sometimes have pain and I sometimes don't. And then just to help her get more space, you know, in the group of the mastermind, I said, okay, who here, just by a show of hands, sometimes has back pain, right? And of course, everybody put their hands up. So now she's starting to get a little bit of freedom around the diagnosis and what that apparently means. And so then obviously I did a bit more of a deep dive into looking at the genesis of perhaps how the physiology gets formed based on the energetics of how we interpret life. And so she told the story, as you reiterated, of how she walked in, her dad's, you know, beating up her mum. She's 13 years old. It's a very scary experience, especially for a child who feels weak and hopeless. And so her interpretation at that moment is that the world is a dangerous place. And I asked her, when you're in an energetic signature of thinking that the world is dangerous, how would your body look, right? If I was to come running at you with a knife like I'm a dangerous person, how would you look? And, you know, for those of you who are watching the video, it's like you cower, you're tense, you're bent over in a protective, especially it's sort of automatic, right? Primal, protect the primal organs, or the vital organs. And so I said, you can just look at this. This is all open for interpretation. It's just a consideration that if from that point of, 13, when you're going through puberty, there's so much growth. But what you've done is you've put this invisible ceiling that is your interpretation of life as dangerous. Then you don't have to be a rocket scientist to recognize that as it relates to an anatomy, you're not fully free to express and expand. And I used the analogy of like if you were to, be a gardener and you plant a rose bush or something in the soil, but you put a glass dome over it, no matter how good the quality of the soil is and the light and the water, it's going to hit the ceiling and eventually it's going to start to buckle. So that for her was, sufficient for her to start to make that correlation and that connection between her interpretation of life, the thoughts and feelings that are associated with that then influence our physiology, right? It's the unmanifest, the frequency informing the form, right? So that which is at the quantum level in all possibilities is starting to be influenced by the filter of how we relate to life such that it manifests in the physical world, in this case, in a spine that wasn't able to fully express itself. What was so beautiful to witness is she's had this for 40 years. I spoke to her for 21 minutes. She started to actually sit taller, even in the space of the conversation, right? And the joke was, you've got to have to tilt your screen back a bit because your forehead is disappearing.
Yeah.
So that's just one example. And that might be harder for people to grasp just in fact because it's a physiological thing. But the number of, obviously you've witnessed some of the other stories in the mastermind that are just so profound. I mean, one of my favorites is the woman who had stage 4 endometriosis, right? And if we went back to her world was the prison is I don't matter. It's in the value proposition. So this first woman, scoliosis, is more in how I relate to life in terms of my safety and security. And for the woman with endometriosis is more how do I relate to others, right? I'm not important, I'm not wanted, I don't matter, I'm not loved. And her particular language is I don't matter. And so as a woman, you could see, well, that would make sense if it's going to present physiologically. If you don't matter, and as a woman, you are the conduit for life to be born, that, well, your view of yourself is that you don't have any significance, and why would you be the conduit for life? So her whole, the endometriosis shut down that reproductive system.
Yeah, and for her to make evolution as a species, it's like where consciousness is guiding this survival mechanism so that we can reproduce. And so if if her consciousness and her field is I don't matter, then just the species energy and its intelligence is wild. Nature's intelligence is going to go, great, we're going to make it so that you can't reproduce.
Yeah. Right, because it becomes a redundant system, and because we're born to be efficient, right, the body is always looking for somewhat the degree of the least amount of resistance, and the way that we, and people do that in the workplace, they do that in relationships, we take shortcuts, right? It's a sort of a preservation of energy. So if she's living in a context of literally a world that she lives in, not the physical world, but everyone's living in their own psychological and emotional world, and that informs their behavior. Literally the view of life is the way that they think and constantly act, and they think it's a truth. It's not. You're basically a walking conversation. And so the conversation she's walking around in is she doesn't matter. It's not that she's aware of it. It's the way I phrase it now is it's the you that you are for yourself, right? Because people talk about limiting beliefs. That's not where it's at. Limiting beliefs will belong to the you that you are for yourself, right? So for her, the limiting belief might be I'm never going to be a mother, which is appropriate for the her that she is for herself, which is she doesn't matter. She's not thinking I don't matter. She is that she doesn't matter. And it's subtle, but that's why it's so profound. So anyway, when she undid all of that, saw it wasn't true, and of course there's a lot of emotion associated with that. She's got all the evidence from her childhood as to where it was born, just like the woman with scoliosis who walks in on the dad beating up the mom. There has to be evidence to create this I that we are for ourselves. But then within 3 months after Mastermind, she went for a checkup and she didn't have endometriosis anymore.
So crazy.
Yeah. So talk about the power of healing, as I know, obviously, we're here to discuss.
Yeah, and it's the shift in consciousness that Anita Moorjani had, know, which I've told a million times. But the profound thing, because, I didn't check the woman's back, Lily, her scoliosis. I don't know what's happened to her physiology, but her energy on screen shifted completely. She went from... because she was like scared of sharing because her worldview was that it's dangerous. So sharing in front of all these people watching her was scary. And then after the work and she had this shift and this realization, not only did her shoulders drop, she sat up, her face was lit up, she had no pain when she twisted. Yeah. But she was like, just like couldn't, it was almost like a Buddha. Like she couldn't stop like laughing with joy. And she was like looking at all the people. She's like, you're all so beautiful. Like that's cut off. That our true nature of that joy and connection is cut off because we have these false lenses that we create.
Absolutely. Everyone is incarcerated in their own unconscious narratives, right? And so her starting is like, as you said, the trepidation, the nervousness about sharing, because in her view, literally, it doesn't matter how quickly you turn your head. The prison you live in is always there. You're always looking through it. And so her initial response was like, I'm embarrassed, or it's taking courage to speak up. Well, but yes, because where you were speaking from initially is the world is dangerous. Once that's dissipated, it sounds kind of, a little dramatic, but she's literally living in a different world. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, there was joy, there was engagement, there was an intimacy and affinity that she had with the group now because she was available.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's why it never gets old. It's just pure magic.
And you just watch yourself doing it, and I'm just like, God, Peter must just love what he does, because he's just like, I don't know, releasing people from their mental suffering in prison every day.
Human suffering, nothing big, like, what are you going to do today, honey? I don't know, get up and free some minds, liberate some souls. What about you?
I am going to selfishly go to a personal experience. I've spoken about it on 2 other podcasts, so hopefully... because it's what I'm dealing with right now, and there's no mistakes. So physiologically, I used to be a runner, and I haven't run for 6 until recently 6 years, because I didn't run when I was pregnant with my 5-year-old and didn't feel right. And then I probably could have been a birth thing because I gave natural unmedicated birth. That was like, an hour of pushing, 16 hours of labor. So something could have gone wonky with my pelvic floor there, or I just went back. I didn't allow myself the healing that I needed after giving birth. So I went back to activity too quickly. And so my bladder sphincter never healed. So there's a disconnect, imbalance in my pelvic floor where some parts are too tight, some parts are too loose. And the effect is if I jump, sneeze, or run, I leak urine.
Yeah.
There's no pain. There's no nothing. I assumed that I could help it heal with some pelvic floor exercises and working with someone, and time would heal. And, cut to 5 years later, it's still happening. So I'm like, running to me is just therapy. I just get so much endorphin, and it's my solitude, and, it makes me feel good. And strong, and I'm out in nature when I do it. So I really need it, and I've gone through a really intense time in my life without having that escape. So, and I'm sure there was a reason for that as well, like my body healing, me not running from my problems all the time. Cut to, I'm training for a marathon that's in November. So I got to like speed this healing along, because I got to start putting on mileage. When I run, I have to wear black leggings. So I just started to run. And I ran 4 miles, and my leggings are like pretty soaked. And it just trickles. It's like, but it doesn't stop, And so then I had a podcast interview with Rob Morgan. He did a healing thing. Usually he's like, I don't need to know or like to know what people's conditions are. I just want to be like a pure channel of the light. But he did talk about these things after, like learning the lesson. And then once you learn the lesson, you let it go. And things shift, and the people that don't heal, like either are not learning the lesson, or they're not. It's the second and third thought after the affirmation or the gratitude. So I'm going into too much here. The next morning after the healing, I went out and ran, and I started to leak, and I was like, okay, well, the healing didn't work. And then I was like, oh, that's my second. What those are doubts, those are fears, those are constraints, out picturing of these constructs in my mind. And so then I started to be just be grateful for everything, grateful that it's improving. At least that's true. And then second and third thought is like, you're full of shit. So I'm like, okay, I gotta just stay in the gratitude. So just practicing extreme awareness of the thoughts and the psyche behind it. Then I heard the word, the lesson, and I realized that, everything has seemed so. I've been in this like overwhelm for a while now. And then I got this puppy, and it was just like the straw that broke the camel's back, because you have like no control. And so it just became so clear that the universe, I had been describing it for a few weeks prior. It was almost like forcing me into surrender and submission to let go of control. And so as I'm running, and as I went through this process, I was like, I've been holding on my whole life, trying to control my circumstances, and it's so exhausting. And eventually the body, the universe, and everything is just kind of like force you into submission and force you to not have control. So like, what's the biggest thing in my body to not have control over? And it's affecting what I can do. So I was like, oh my gosh, I got the lesson. And I'm not joking. Like the rest of the run, I didn't pee. So there was this liberation in that intellectual awareness. Then came back, some stressful stuff happened, and I tried to run again, and it was really hot, so I've been hydrating a lot. I don't know what the cause is, but I imagine that it was like awareness was there, but then it's still something hasn't fully dropped about the lesson or the awareness. So I peed again, so I had to stop running because I was just kind of frustrated. So I just feel like you'll have some insight into that. But I feel like the lesson lately has been just to like let go, really let go and trust. And stop trying to control, manipulate life to make you feel safe. Me feel safe.
Exactly. Okay. I get it. And thank you for your vulnerability. And I can only imagine, as well as I know you and some of your patterns and constraints, like the as we're seeing, you know, with your tears, the impact that has. So I first of all just want to say you have my compassion as always, and how difficult that is for a beautiful woman who is so committed to her health and wellness, and your message to help people, that's definitely a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things you said that to me are quite telling, right? So you started the whole story saying I was a runner. And so there's a collapse there, right? So what happens is, and it's all in that realm of control, is that you're identifying with yourself as someone who you were. And what you're saying is, it's not who I am now. And so as long as you're using that noun, it's a placeholder in time and space, and you've got some sort of connotation about who you were as a runner. You know, I didn't have this issue. I was much stronger. I was fitter. And then you have the litany of excuses as to why, you know, you had birth and your pelvis and the labor and all the things that are on top of it. But the first thing to understand is you were never a runner. You've always been you, and at some time in your life you ran. Okay. Right? So we kind of shift it from an identity that has got all of this without going into it. We can start to associate what it meant to you to be a runner, right? Versus, no, you were a human, and I can certainly, for myself, remember as a kid, I would run a lot more. Most kids run, and now most adults are pretty sedentary, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing to do, is for you that there's an association of worth, value, strength, status, being a runner versus I'm not a runner, right? Or now I'm not able to run. Mm-hmm. Do you see? It's subtle, right? But it's like, so you're somehow diminishing yourself because you're not who you were.
Yeah. Not able to run means that I'm not free to do what I want to do. That brings me joy.
Right. Which is what adds the pressure.
Right.
And you're already in a world of immense amount of self-judgment, mm-hmm. right? Because you're human, but also with some of the patterns I know that you live in, right? So here I was something great, and now I'm not something great. Mm. But because of your conditioning, I'm going to try and be great again. So you've put your foot on the brake. I'm not great, but I'm going to put more pressure on the accelerator. And then you wonder why some sphincters aren't able to sustain their job, right? Right? So there's immense amount of pressure. So that's the first thing. You weren't a runner. You've always been you at the essence of who you are. And there were times in your life where you happened to run a lot. And you've collapsed running with freedom. And then the second part later in what you were sharing is you said, you know, I love to run, and I kind of need to run is the word you said. Like, so there's more pressure in your language because it's what makes me strong. And you've got the cart before the horse. So you're collapsing running with the access to strength. And actually life is saying, no, it's not that way around. You're strong, and that is the precursor to whether you choose to run or not. Mm-hmm. And in fact, life is saying you don't understand how strong you are. You're strong enough as a being that you can run even if you have a little bit of leakage from your bladder. So you've got it completely the other way around. So that's what you're using the term surrender, right? So it's actually how strong can you be as a woman that even in the face of some physiological seeming mishaps, that my strength is not because of my anatomy and the fact that I've gone for a run. You might get all the neurochemicals and the endorphins after a run, and that's where you collapse my strength. But your strength is not because of what you did, it's because of who you are. Mm. So that to me is why you had that moment, because it's placebo effect, right? Like not knocking any healings and stuff like that, but where you had this moment of like surrender, this is the lesson, like you found acceptance. Mm-hmm. But the acceptance is really where you let go of your results or in the outcome after something. So you're running in order to feel strong and better about yourself. What I'm saying is no, it's because you feel strong and better about yourself that you choose to run. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So when you remove the old image of somebody you were better than back then than you are now, which is pressure and inadequacy or weakness, right? Mm-hmm. That's where the strength has gone. So you've got the weakness of a comparison to a former version of yourself which is better than who you are. So you've already diminished yourself energetically. Then on top of that, you collapse. Getting back to that is on the other side of doing something. So now you've got 0 for 2. I'm weak relative to who I was, and I can't be strong unless I can do the thing that I think makes me strong. No, you're actually way more evolved than you've ever been. You're way stronger for that reason. You've just misassociated your strength on the other side of an activity as opposed to the being that you are. So if you abide in that, and we can already see it, I can see it in your energy, right? Like there's a stillness that you're feeling where you're like, okay, yeah, there's nothing wrong. First of all, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of leakage or anything. It doesn't really matter. But you're making it as, there's the judgment is more pressure, the pressure compounded with the previous version of you that you're not anymore. And then you've got all of this pressure on top of, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of a compromise based on childbirth, whatever. But to me, it doesn't justify there being some sort of leakage. It just doesn't. You've got sufficient strength in that bladder sphincter to not have to do that. But energetically, just like the woman who can generate pain from the belief that she's in a world that's dangerous, even though that 23% of people with scoliosis don't have pain.
Including me.
Huh?
Including me.
Yeah.
I'm one of those.
Yeah, exactly. And so equally here, just because you used to run, you weren't a runner, you were you, less evolved than you are now, weaker back then, stronger now. Because you're stronger, life is giving you the opportunity to continue to develop more strength, not because you have to run, because you can be the big enough space to allow for what seems like a physiological defect, which it isn't. It's just an opportunity for you to embrace more love and self-acceptance, which is the precursor to your physiology relaxing enough and not having excess pressure so that the leaking doesn't happen.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the access, ironically, to that not happening is being okay with it happening. And I understand, as I said, that's why I wanted to acknowledge you at the beginning, a beautiful woman, and you're out and you're blah, 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 and doing whatever you are, and you represent so many people in the world of health and wellness, and there seems like a conflict to that. That's not what people want. They don't want perfect bodies. It seems like that we're very externally focused, right? It's all about appearance. What people really want is an internal sense of true freedom. So somebody who's really committed to the work, like you have evolved, you're more wise, you're more mature, and for that reason, the seeming challenges are more refined so that you can be with this. It's like, oh. And at that moment, I can feel in my body there's a release that is about the tension, which is allowing my body to actually relax, which is therefore not excess pressure on a system that may be a little bit compromised right now. It doesn't really matter. That's got nothing to do with what's actually transpiring. So let go of the judgment of who you were as a comparison for who you're not today, and recognize that your strength is not on the other side of running, but rather the precursor to doing it no matter what happens. And how does that feel?
Yeah, it feels, the pressure I put on myself in every area is the issue, you know? And not to, I don't want to diminish what Rob did, because he disclaimed at the beginning. I know, and I know you weren't either. I just wanted to say to the audience, like, he's just like, I'm not here to judge if I'm healing what you're asking to be healed or not. I'm just sitting here to be a conduit for whatever the intelligence thinks you need a little help with or whatever, you know? And so I'm fixated on this one thing.
Yeah.
He wasn't. And it was, you know, very profound for me to explore. But again, all these awarenesses are intellectualized, you know? And so to, like, as you talk, it is all the pressure I put on myself. So it's control, but it's also, it's two-part. I'm trying to control to feel safe, which we can address, because obviously I have a construct that life is not safe.
Yeah.
Or I've been still seeking outside of myself for safety, I guess is more accurate, rather than finding that innate safety inside.
Yeah. Well, let's phrase it this way, right? If we were to live from the future fulfilled, if you knew that on the back of this conversation, maybe go for a run later or tomorrow, and there's, you know, relatively speaking, there's still a little leakage, but let's say it's 50%. And then in 2 days, you go for another run after that, and now it's down to 30%. And within the space of 10 days, it's all done.
That sounds awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
But just that sigh and the expression of that feels awesome is reflective of what I'm pointing to, right? That is the absence of pressure, the pressure being the precursor to the event. So what I just presented there, this is what I did, you know, with our friend DeAndre, you know, when he couldn't shoot more than 37% from the free throw line, you know, was paint a different future that elicited a different experience, which then became self-fulfilling. So in the absence of the pressure, like you just showed me and validated my perspective, which is, oh God, that'd be awesome if that doesn't happen. Well, that release in the tension, which is creating the extra pressure, is the absence of the leakage, which also shows me that what I presented as a possible future in the realm of all things that could happen in the quantum, that is absolutely a possibility. Mm-hmm. But what you're localized on and your focal point that is creating the actual event itself is, that's not the future you think you're stepping into.
Yeah.
So now you've got the pressure of your history that you're not the person you were, the present event of whatever is occurring that is discomforting that you don't want, combined with extra fear of what could transpire that hasn't even happened yet.
Based on what has transpired and just projecting the past we were resisting into the future.
Hence why my quote is, past hurt informs future fear. So you've got past hurt, pressure, which is like the holding of something, informing future fear, which is now the avoidant energy of it, both of which is just pressure. And then, you know, good luck trying to hold on to anything.
Anxiety,
right?
Depression, the whole
yeah, welcome to being
mental
human.
health of
right.
the collective is collapsed.
Yeah. So again, you're being informed by your history, which is what the brain does because it's designed to predict and protect. So your brain is doing its job, but you're also in the auspices of there's something wrong. So not only are you not safe, which could be a bedfellow to this, but there's something wrong with you. So, you know, it's not safe in the world and it's not safe to be me because I have a problem. Right? So the world doesn't occur as safe. The woman with scoliosis, it's slightly different language, but it's dangerous. It's a more amplified. But for you, with your history and parents and all the things that you went through, I'm not safe. Mm-hmm. But then it's also not safe for you to be you because there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. So now you've got pressure on top of pressure. And it all fits within the world of fundamentally, you know, that there's just something wrong with you, with life. And there's not. There's just nothing wrong.
Yeah.
So if you can just for now, I know you don't want this, but if you could energetically choose it, then it removes the resistance, which is actually the precursor to it not happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's judgment about the way things should be.
Yeah.
And also, as you speak, I'm thinking of my childhood and making a mistake. Mm-hmm. AKA being human, also being a kid.
Yeah.
You should be making mistakes every time. You're learning how to be in the physical on the planet. Making a mistake equated to potentially, a blowing up parent, causing tension, which then leads you to believe or view life as, if I make a mistake, there's something wrong with me. I'm stupid.
And there's consequences.
And it's scary or whatever. So I literally, as much work that I've done, I still operate from that, don't want to disappoint people, don't want to hurt people, don't want to do things that I feel in my heart and soul I need to do because it's so scary that, to embrace my humanity, Yeah. It's just crazy.
It is, but it's okay. And now as a mother, you can sort of use the gift of, your child as a teacher to realize how much you embrace her with all the mistakes she makes, right? So the version of you, your own little girl, who's so scared, so terrified of making a mistake, which is part of this, the tension that she puts on herself, the pressure that she feels as though she has to do something, right? But really all of that is pointing to ultimately you're asking other people to embrace you whilst not embracing yourself, right? It's the ultimate betrayal of yourself, where you think there's something wrong with you, that you could do something wrong, or that people might not love you for you. And here's the irony, everybody's walking around with the same conversations. That's why dating apps are so popular. Right? It's like, I can't pick me, I don't select me, but hopefully someone else will. And so in this, you're choosing you, all of you, even right now with the physiology that seems to be going through it is healing itself. It is, the body's always doing that. Yeah. But it's like, so you're on the highway and the car's got a flat tire and you've got your buddy leaning out the window, like with a pump, trying to fix it at the same time. Yeah. It's like, just chillax, relax. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing that you have to try and compensate for because of who you were. There's nothing to fix right now. And there's certainly nothing to fear because it hasn't happened yet. right? It's all fictitious. And this is how strong your mind is, that with that energy that you're living in, literally the world of self-judgment and the fact that you're doing something wrong and there's going to be consequences is just like it's a prison sentence.
Yeah. And then you see it the pattern is replaying in the way I parent, although I've come great stride from my experience. Mm-hmm. And my parents are awesome and I love them, but it was my experience. So I'll just take the puppy because I don't want to, that's what I'm dealing with right now. But like the puppy is an infant, like, went to 2 months of training, and for whatever the reason in this house that we're in, we've traveled to different houses and it's fine. And there's reasons that I could justify, but she just, there's no grass in the yard and there's no grass in the front yard. And so we got to, so she's confused and she's often peeing and pooping. If I don't time it perfectly, she'll pee and poop on the rugs. Yeah. Which is, as you know, puppy pee and poop is not fun to clean up. Yeah. And I'm, I get frustrated with her. She's just a dog being free. Yeah. Not, trying to figure out life. And, like with the instinct to punish her, like tap her on the head and be like, no, Yeah. And I'm punishing and judging myself that I'm doing something wrong. Like she went to training and now I'm fucking it up, or, and I'm just like, that's the pressure that I'm under and I'm losing. It's like, no, the puppy is like a dream. I mean, everybody's like this, you got this perfect dog. She's so cuddly. She's so cute. And I'm still just like watching myself like get so triggered by her and beating myself up for not being perfect because she's pooping and peeing on the carpet. It's like, it's mental. It's so clear to me, but I can't so it's just all coming to a head because I have done so much work, but I still need you to pull the tick head out or something.
I get it. So the thing to notice, all of that lives within the fundamental part of us as a human that's really just trying to survive. Because all of the things you just shared is in the world. There's nothing wrong. Poop on the rug all day. Don't even pick it up. Right? But you live in a world, literally physically in a world where that's inappropriate, or it's somebody else's rug and it's an expensive rug, right? But in reality, it's just what it is. Yeah. It's a piece of material that has no inherent value other than whatever the retailer thought and the person that bought it was happy to go along with, right? But it's just whatever it is. And so it's the reaction, which is you're not okay with the way things are, which again comes back to what I was saying earlier, that you're under the impression that fundamentally the world that you live in, the absolute prison that everyone lives in, is there's something wrong with the way things are. Mm-hmm. And just consider there isn't. That doesn't mean it's great. It doesn't mean it's what you want. It doesn't mean it condones what's going down. It doesn't mean that the things that you're witnessing on the news or wherever are great. No, but there's nothing wrong. It's just the way it is. Yeah. So now you start to have harmony with life versus fighting life all the time. The fight with life is creating the suffering. That doesn't mean that we don't take actions, but it's from the energy that we do it that makes the difference for our own internal terrain. Like I just worked with someone this morning, and she realized, as sweet as she is, as loving as she is, as she's such a stand for justice and what's fair, she's the one judging everyone. Because she sees that people aren't functioning that way. And she didn't realize that in her world, she, is the almighty sayer of what people should do. And she just was laughing. She's like, oh my God, like here I am thinking that I'm a stand for justice and fairness, but I'm judging the shit out of people. Yeah. And then she wondered why she has whatever's going on in her body. And again, it's to be really clear, it doesn't condone behavior. There's a lot of abhorrent, disgusting things that go on in the world, but that's also somebody's karma. That's the way they're behaving based on their view, and whoever's perhaps the victim of that in that realm of victim and perpetrator, that's their karma. They have to experience whatever they're experiencing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel good to witness things that we feel are, atrocities, but in your own world to recognize, wow, my relationship to life, I'm looking through the lens of judgment. And it's all this control where you're trying desperately to hold on to something, but what you're energetically saying is, I can't hold it anymore. Mm-hmm. Literally, figuratively, physiologically, I can't do it. So life, your body is asking you just to relax and stop letting go of trying to control everything, let things be. Mm-hmm. And of course, we co-create as best as we can. But at the end of the day, you know, there's just like, let go, let God, right? And if it's something that comes your way that you really want, it's by God's, like the gift of God or whatever they call it. And if it's not, it's God's will, right? The grace of God is when we get something we want, and God's will. I'm obviously not very au fait with religion, but you know, that to you is where you're recognizing, okay, if this is what I'm going through right now, where can I recognize that I'm holding on too tight to the fact that my own physiology is not working anymore? Because it seems counterintuitive, like, well, I don't want to relax. Well, no, it's because you're holding too tight. Like if I keep holding this glass above the table, eventually my hand's going to it can't do it anymore. That's the tension that's been there for, you know, years. And it's like, if I can just relax and regain my strength, then everything starts to function as intended, naturally.
And so with what I'm so aware, obviously, and then the exercise we just went through, do I need to once you deconstruct the constraint, do I need to replace it with a
No, it's just noticing what you're doing right now. It's to notice the pressure you're putting yourself on. Again, if we look in the timelines of past, present, and future. Past, you've got some idolized vision of you that you're not today. So you're using your past for further evidence that you're somehow diminished. Actually, it's quite the opposite. The fact that you can be so vulnerable, talk about this in public, shows that you're way more mature than you ever were, right? So you can start to reframe the way that you're even relating to your history, right? Yeah, I used to run. You weren't a runner, right? So switch it from a noun to a verb. I used to run. And now I still can run. But you're using that as evidence as to the fact that you're running right now is somehow compromised, right? You're pulling from past, present, and future to justify your reality. So start to see the lie, right? Yeah, you used to run, but you weren't ever a runner, right? It's just a way of categorizing something you did. And now it's like, well, now I have a problem. No, you don't. You just have what you have. And your concern is that problem is not only going to perpetuate, but it might even get worse. So you've got 0 for 3 now in terms of your relationship to time and space. And in fact, no. Yeah, I enjoyed running. It was great. So what? I also had, you know, fucking pancakes when I was 16. I don't think about it twice. You know, it's like I can't remember that shit, right? There's no history has no meaning unless your ego is using it for some evidence as to what's not working right now.
Ooh, let's say that again.
Yeah, so people are just pulling from their history. The only reason that you would hold on to anything from your past is because it's being used as evidence for why right now your ego wants to be right about something that's not working in your life today. And if you really get that, then you start to see the futility of holding on to anything because, as you know, my quote, what happened, couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't. And that's a way to reconcile both our history and also bring forgiveness for whatever we did and whatever we didn't do. You couldn't be anywhere else because you're not. But if you can pull evidence from both past and future, which is both, you know, like it's a memory and it's an imagination, to use as collateral, then wow, now I've got ammunition to hold on to the constraint that I pretend that I don't actually want to be in. Mm-hmm. Again, I say being right is the poor man's version of self-worth.
Mm-hmm. That is so good. Your quotes are so good. When is your dang book coming out? I've been asking you for 12 years.
It's maybe been a bit longer, actually. Yes, no, I've had some big epiphanies in myself around that recently. So,
good.
Yeah, so it's actually
it wasn't ready until
no, exactly,
ready, yeah.
And it couldn't be any other way because it's not. But I also remain committed now to actually being a man of my word in that regard because that's such a pillar of my work is to honor the words that come out of our mouth because they create our reality. And I have at times said, you know, without too much of a specific date or anything, like, you know, hopefully next year or, you know, but it's a little bit weak, right? It's not very profound. So I'm looking at all of that for myself. But it is coming and it's getting rapidly. And it could
just be version 1 of 20, you know?
Oh yeah, no, there's a whole slew of books that I've got behind it. So the pressure of them is starting to leak my book out.
Yeah, good.
So you start to see, okay, great. You're only holding on to the past as evidence to justify a future that's not working for you, and stop doing that because your history couldn't have been any different. There's nothing wrong with the way you are at all. And to recognize as it relates to your perception of the future, it's all imagined. And for that reason, your imagination is going to be informed by the thing that you're trying to avoid, and actually start to be committed to and a stand for. My body knows exactly what it's doing. It's constantly trying to heal. In the absence of me putting pressure on itself, it will be totally fine. So for now, I'm at peace with the way that things are functioning or not functioning, because I know that it's in the absence of me and my judgment, it's going to take care of what needs to be taken care of.
I love it. I'm into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, like without sort of making these sort of grandiose gestures of like, oh yeah, it's going to stop right now because of this conversation, I'm giving you a little bit of grace that next time you go for a run, if it happens, can you be okay with that?
Mm-hmm. I can be okay. Can a guy walking by me on the street be okay? I'm like sloshing by. I'm kidding.
Yes. No, but there's a degree of truth in that, right? So that's where we can start to see, like, think about this. If you were the only human being on the planet, the significance of that event starts to lose its pressure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, now we start to see how you relate to others, which is this, again, primal need to be loved and accepted, which is really the absence of love and acceptance for yourself. You know, when Riley used to pee her diapers, and even as you're changing her, pee all over you or poop herself, or, you know, was there any pressure that you put on her?
No, you laugh when the pee stream flies up over the bed. Yeah.
Right. That's part of the genesis of that human being in terms of losing their own, you know, or gaining their own neurological control and understanding what it is to be human and control your waste and all of that, right? But there was no judgment. And so you're now in a period of your life where anatomically, based on all of these decades of pressure, your body's like, hey, you know, certain things are starting to be less integrous than they might have been, which is going to happen for all of us. But without that formative integrity, like, and the pressure now is more, that delta is a little too much right now. There's nothing wrong with the actual integrity of your bladder. It's just with the immense amount of pressure that you've accumulated over time, the pressure's starting to win out. So the more that you can just relax and go, oh, first of all, this is kind of comical if you think about it. It's not what I want, but who cares? What I really want is to go for a run. And what I'm actually embodying is freedom and a sense of relief. So what better way than to enhance that, where I get to do two for the price of one?
I get to pee. I relieve myself on that.
At the same time. I mean, you're a mother. You have to be super efficient these days, right?
It's so true.
It's
I
like,
love that twist.
Yeah.
That's
right.
great.
So it's like, that's how fucking efficient I am. It's like, you know,
it's
before you know it, in a couple of years, you might be pooping yourself. While you're I got more time to be with my family.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So really, it is that humor. It is recognizing as humans, we're all flawed. I mean, again, I'm at the bow of the boat. I've been through so much in the last 6 to 8 months, you know, courtesy of a beautiful relationship, I think some of which you know about. And it's just recognizing the humility that, you know, is brought upon us when we recognize, oh, we think we're a certain way. And there's so much still to learn and to embrace and to find truly this sense of unconditional love and acceptance for our own flaws and imperfections.
Yeah, I have a question about relationships after this.
Okay.
But as you were talking, I want to mention, like, you know, I've had great success manifesting things, and I go in and out of my seeming, like, you know, perceived power into manifesting. And I do believe from my experience and from learning from a lot of the masters, like, we're co-creators with life.
Yeah.
And as you're talking, it makes sense that, because I've always, like, struggled with, like, to what degree are we co-creators? And you know, as you talk about, like, the frequency informs, you know, the thoughts, behaviors, actions, results.
Yeah.
The frequency and the form, the consciousness informs the frequency, informs the form. And that's like Harold Saxton Burr's work, the Yale researcher who studied mice with uterine cancer, thought that the uterine cancer tumors emitted a field, an electromagnetic field, and what he found was actually the field was there before the tumor, then the form created up into this field, because he saw mice with the same uterine cancer signature field, but the cancer hadn't developed yet, but did like a couple weeks later.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is, like, as far as like manifesting and shifting things in life, we are co-creators because our consciousness, hopefully more conscious than subconscious, is informing the frequency into the field, into the form, and what we experience. So we have some power in co-creating based on our consciousness informing the frequency. And then there's life's intelligence and frequency that's going to give us experiences and circumstances like a relationship, or a tragedy or a trauma, that's going to give us leaky bladder, to give us the opportunity to self-reflect, release, let go, deconstruct, all these things.
Yeah.
So it's that fine line between consciousness, like elevating your consciousness to create new form of reality.
Yeah.
And being okay with all the circumstances that come your way, knowing that your soul, I think is kind of the way you put it, created these experiences for you.
Yeah.
And for your ascension.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So the quote, I think quotes help people because it sort of points to the same thing in a more sort of short form, but it's succinct. Yeah. Like, so life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. Right, so you're going to keep getting these invitations to see where, in this case, you're not free about the fact that just right now, these are the two words to focus on, is right now. You don't know what it looks like. It's right now. It seems as though, and we don't even know right now because you might go for a run this afternoon and nothing happens. So that the perpetuation of a history that you're not at peace with, that you're not allowing, that you're holding on to, is actually the quote-unquote energy of manifestation. And I think, while you mentioned the word, it's one of these buzzwords, especially in spiritual communities, that I think gets tossed around with so little accuracy. Because to me, the way that most people interpret manifestation is it's out there, right? It's something I have to do. So it's out there in the future. Like if I really manifest, I'll get the fill in the blank, the dream partner, the job that I want, the money, the healing. So as soon as you create space, you create time, right? So it's out there and there's going to be time and it's incumbent upon me to do it. And those are the trifecta of inaccuracy as far as I'm concerned, because what you're doing is the life you already have is a byproduct of the you that you are for yourself. So you've been manifesting nonstop. You can't not manifest. As a human being, that's all you're doing. The question is, who are you that is the precursor to the manifestation, which is happening instantaneously? It's not, I, the limited version of myself that is focused on an unlimited experience. How can it's sort of as redundant as picking up a red pen that's got red ink in it and saying, I'm going to manifest blue. Well, no, because the iteration of who you are right now has manifested the life that you're in resistance to. And so doesn't matter how much you try, aren't going to manifest a life that's not in keeping with the version of you that needs to be the precursor to that outcome. So manifestation has got nothing to do with what you do or out there in time. It's who you be. And that's why I said to you, and you had a beautiful sigh and you had this moment of release. I said, okay, if that doesn't necessarily happen next time, but 2 days, maybe 10 days from now, it's done. So you manifested at that moment. Like if we had a urologist here who was able to somehow measure the strength of your sphincter, however, minute, I promise you at that moment that you had the release, they would have seen some extra strength in your sphincter. And it wasn't because you went for a run and didn't pee, it was because you manifested the experience of it prior to the event itself. So manifestation, if you really understand it, is about discovering the experience within yourself as a frequency, which then is the precursor to the outcome. And most people have the other way around. I'll feel the way I feel if I can manifest the outcome that I feel is on the other side of that. Well, then that's the perpetual self-fulfilling prophecy of who you currently are, and that's why things don't work. I mean, they're working to the degree that you are manifesting who you currently are. So I know that's a lot, but if you can start to see you're living from a fulfilled future now, like this was one of the biggest things that hit me. Like most people think their past is behind them and their future is in front of them. Some sort of association with space like that. No, your past is here with you now, and your future is here with you now. I'll never forget when I first started working with a PGA golfer, and he tripled his winnings within 2 seasons, which was pretty significant. You go up to any company and say, triple your bottom line, within 2 years. They'd be like, okay, just tell me how much you want us to pay you.
Yeah.
And so this was sort of in the middle of our first season together, and he pretty much doubled within the first year. And I was waiting at the 18th green for him to finish his round, and one of the head TV anchors for the Golf Channel was there, and he came up to me, and he said, oh, Peter, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, I've heard so much about your work, and obviously so-and-so, it's incredible what they're doing, and congratulations on your success. He said, would it be okay if I sit down and have a chat with you sometime? And I said, sure. He said, because I've got a lot of things in my past. And I said to him, no, you don't. And he was a bit confused. I said, they're with you right now.
Ooh.
If they were in your past, you wouldn't have to sit down and talk to me. Right? So when you really get that, it's like you're living right now in your body, physiologically, emotionally, and psychologically, as though whatever happened in your last run and the runs prior to that is a problem. No, that's just what happened. I have no idea what's going to happen next time. So then you start to see, wow, my history and my perception of a future exist in who I am today. And for that reason, I'm either living with hurt and regret from a history that's already finished. You know, people say, let go of it. It's like, there's nothing to let go of. It's done. The question is, to what degree can you let be with it, right? To what degree can I accept and embrace my history? It's already done. And with regards to how I imagine the future, which is really a reflection of the history I've yet to accept, then you like go, oh shit, like I just keep reacting to whatever I haven't fully accepted yet. And so now the speedboat is being informed by the wake as opposed to being driven to the direction that you're committed to. Right? And then you wonder why people's lives don't work. So manifestation is a complete misnomer for most people. They don't understand it. They think it's something that's incumbent upon them. It's in the future. And for that reason, it's got some time component. No, it's instantaneous.
And if, say, you want to manifest something.
Mm-hmm.
Like
me personally or one?
You.
Okay.
Personally. Peter Crone says, you know what, I'd really like to, you know, get a house in the south of France.
Mm-hmm.
Do you just go, what if I had a house in the south of France?
Mm-hmm.
And like feel into that? Like what's your process?
I would ask the question, why?
Okay.
Because the thing that we think we want is not what we want. We want what we think is on the other side of having it.
Okay.
And that experience is already in me. So I can have the experience of, in this case, a house in the south of France before even having the house, at which point I may no longer need to have the house. We're everything that we're looking for. We're under the impression that it's out there is the means to getting that experience. And that's the facade, that's the lie, that's the pretense. And that's why people are victims of their circumstance, but they're not. It's the perception of the circumstance because they think there's something lacking in them in the first place. So then you realize, you know, that we are everything that we're looking for. We're just collapsing it with the outside world as though that's where it's at. And so then we effort our lives away trying to get what we think is going to garner the very experience that's actually available to us right now. Mm-hmm. Which I would put in words like freedom, peace, love, inherent worth. They're all there. Mm-hmm. And that's why life is a revelatory process. It's not about getting something, it's actually about removing and dissolving what's in the way of realizing that I am that which I'm looking for.
Relationships.
Sure, they're fun.
They're super fun.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible, I mean, you're obviously where you're at, you know, freedom, on the freedom spectrum. Mm-hmm. Do you need someone that's like, how does a relationship work with you? Do two people need to be on the journey of self-reflection together for it to work? Like, what's the formula?
No. You know, I once did a very short post where I did Q&As or Ask Me Anythings on Instagram, you know, and I think the question was something like, how do you know when you found the right one? And my response is, they're all the right one. Because they're right for where you're at in terms of what you're requesting to be revealed through that person. So it's always a mirror, right? So I wouldn't say that, and again, it sort of speaks to, it's a great question, but it speaks to a little bit of Kelly's mind, right? Which is trying to get things right, right?
That's why I have this dang podcast.
Exactly.
Figure it out.
I'm going to get all the answers. And no, so for me, it's sort of, it becomes so redundant, not in a way to dismiss your partner, but to realize that at the end of the day, everybody is simply a reflection for where we're not free. And so it doesn't matter who you date, whether you marry, whether you don't get married, you get divorced, you get married again. It's really irrelevant. And that is in no way to, as I said, to diminish or to dismiss the significance of commitment to other humans, right? Like, you don't want to just be using people as like, well, you know, I'm going to date you for as long as I need until such time that I'm free, and then I'll find somebody else. You know, like, I want people to honor their word, and especially when it comes to vows. And that's something that I've had to look at myself, right? Is like, what are we a stand for? What are we really committed to in the way that we make a declaration to another human being? So whether someone's doing the work or not, you know, that's often a question I get from people who might come to one of my masterminds or a workshop or where I speak. They're like, you know, how do we deal with somebody who isn't willing to do the work whilst I'm doing the work? I'm like, great, you know, awesome, because now you get to do more work because I can hear judgment in your voice. So there's the absence of love, because what you're saying is, if only my partner would do the work, I'd be happier. That's a lie, right? So now you get the opportunity to incorporate and develop and evolve into a much more loving being. So it really, I know it sounds, again, sort of a little bit crass or callous, but it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter who you date, because you're going to be exposed to what you still haven't transcended. Now, of course, it's so much nicer to date somebody who you're attracted to, who you have fun with, you have shared interests, your lifestyles are somewhat commensurate. But at the end of the day, as it relates to emotions and spiritual evolution, you're going to get triggered. So what I've discovered for myself is, and of late, and certainly what I've gone through in a relationship, is I'm more in love with the person that I was with, who I thought was the biggest catalyst for my upsets and triggers because of their behavior, because it triggered me. Mm-hmm. Right? That's unusual, right? Because I've realized the man I'm becoming and the man I'm growing into is only by virtue of who they were, versus this copacetic, really sweet, nice, kind person who never really has anything confronting to say. That's like walking into the gym and giving you 2-3 pound dumbbells and say, okay, like, let's pump out 10 curls. You're like, okay, then what? Like, there's no resistance there. There's nothing that's causing you to grow. Yeah. So I would, and this is why we could argue the old adage of, opposites attract. And I would argue because that's where you're going to get your buttons pushed, because of the conflict.
Teary? Are you getting teary about your old relationship?
No, okay. No, I'm happy to, but not in this case. That was just an itch.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm very moved by it. I really I'm proud of the man I'm becoming, courtesy of that, for which I just really acknowledge this woman, because it's the first time I would say that I've really been confronted in a way that was discomforting, that I felt like I couldn't handle, which was the opportunity for me to learn how to handle, which was the invitation to become a real man.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
New way of looking at things.
Yeah, versus like it's cutting something out because it doesn't work for you, as opposed to how can I become a big enough being to deal with it. And of course, there's a sliding scale. I mean, if someone's being abused, that's really not the growth domain. You don't want to stick around and say, oh yeah, see how many fucking slaps around the face I can handle. It's like, this is obviously everything within the comfort of your own evolution and the speed with which you're willing to look at things. But for me, I can handle and tolerate quite a lot, and my capacity to have a bandwidth for somebody else's, in this case, we could argue dysfunctions or traumas that are being expressed and spilling out onto me. It doesn't mean that you want to put up with something, but you have to make a decision as to what you're willing to use as a catalyst for your own growth versus something that just doesn't work for you, That's
the question. How do we know the difference? Like, at what point do we stop growing and go, this is just not a energy I want to be in?
Well, that's where you have to, through conversation, see to what degree then does somebody want to also be accountable and responsible for their behaviors. And that's through the vulnerability of saying, hey, I can see my part in this, the co-creation of the relationship. But I also am curious to what degree are you willing to chip in here and see that your behaviors aren't conducive to us having a loving, fulfilling, kind, respectful relationship. And if someone can take accountability, that to me warrants, sticking around.
Yeah.
Say thank you for doing your part. I'm going to do my part. That to me is the beauty of a real relationship, is that you're both committed to growing, courtesy of each other's stand for the overarching sense of love and the chalice that you've decided to sit in together.
Yeah.
Can you sit in the fire together such that you can both rise from the ashes of your own trauma and your own histories that was always present prior to even knowing each other?
Yeah, and that's like such the controversy with marriage is 50 or more percent, and in divorce it's like there's something good about that container so that people don't just run. It's like, but you have to be conscious of the fact that, like, oh no, this is we're at least committing to the point of, like, let's do the work and take accountability and grow until as long as we're meant to grow together. But most people don't use that container that way, and it's just so.
Yeah, it's tough, and again, I say it with all the compassion in the world, but most people just don't want to be responsible for their existence. The predominant state of mind is a victim. And for most people, it's really justified. Like, if you knew my dad and he was an asshole, and you knew my spouse, she's a bitch. And, it's like people really think that the way that they view life is through the lens of I am at the effect of life. And there's just the absence of both accountability, responsibility, and personal power that, like, for whatever reasons, I've attracted these circumstances for my own growth and evolution. It's just most people don't look at it that way. That doesn't mean you have to stick around and tolerate things. You know, I think that's where women fall short, right? The resilience of a woman is just something that a man can't fathom, right? It's just incredible. Like, truly, even as a woman, then I give a little bit more kudos to mothers, you know, just without wanting to anyway dismiss women generally, but you know, the capacity of a mother to withstand physical pain just by virtue of childbirth is something that most men just can't even comprehend. And so what happens, unfortunately, is because of that capacity to withstand pain and, you know, subsequently suffering, is women will go from this position of like inherent natural resilience to psychological tolerance. And it's a disservice to both themselves and their partner, where they're learning to put up with something because they can, versus using their resilience as a form of being a stand for something in the way that they get treated with respect and love and kindness. You know, there's obviously some buffer in there in terms of, okay, we want to occasionally hold the little child of our partner, the man who can be vulnerable enough to sort of feel shy or embarrassed about something that didn't work out, and the woman can step up and say, I got you. But she doesn't want to have a third or fourth child who's represented as a husband, right? And conversely, the other way around. If the woman is having a bad day, or just the chemistry of her body each month, you know, is feeling very emotional, can the man be strong enough to just hold space and not take what she says personally and be affected like a little boy who's, you know, all butt hurt, you know? And so I think that's the beauty of a relationship. It's just, rather than being 95% a woman and 5% a little girl and 95% a man and then 5% a little boy, those roles tend to be reversed, you know, where, you know, I'm going to give more credit to the woman. The women tend to be more mature. And so invariably, okay, maybe you got 50-50 with a woman, but it's 5% a man and 95% a boy, you know, and that dynamic's just not going to work. And this is why we have, you know, these boss women and the masculine that's being way too far expressed in the feminine. And it's like leading to all sorts of stress and pressures and imbalances and dysfunctions. You know, I'm not saying we should adhere to a traditional model, but there's something beautiful about the archetypes of the man who's the rock, who provides the stability and the safety, and the woman who gets to express her divinity through this endless forms of dance and clothing and handbags and shoes, and just the beauty of her self-expression, which includes nurturance and supporting the family in a way that is really just about love. But there has to be the container for her to feel safe enough to be able to do that. And, you know I've fallen short in my past relationships, and that's something that I'm willing to look at and be accountable for.
Well, women and probably men, audience members, are swooning everywhere, going, pick me. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, we could talk for hours. I should just have you on once a month, to be honest, if you're willing.
That's fine. The monthly Heal with Pedro. Yeah.
Monthly Heal with Pedro. It's so powerful. Thank you so much. Where can people find you? And again, when's your next mastermind? Because anybody who was moved by this conversation, or just your work in general, follow you on Instagram, like, it truly is such a powerful investment into your own healing. Thank you.
Best place to find me, the Instagram is @PeterCrone. It's all just my name, so @PeterCrone. My website, petercrone.com. Facebook, I think the Mind Architect, Peter Crone. And then with regards to the mastermind, I think we're doing one in August, so I'm not sure when this will come out. So super excited. We've got so much buzz around it. People are really, like, in the collective, starting to hear, you know, the miracles and the power of that 3-month journey together. We're actually now also doing our first live get together for a weekend for masterminders, and people are freaking out. Like, it's so fun from all corners of the world. People are like, I am coming, because people want to meet each other. They witness these transformations. It's like a family, right? You see someone who had endometriosis who doesn't, somebody who was in an abusive relationship and is now not, or somebody who spent their whole life thinking that they're totally inadequate and they're not enough, who suddenly is the leader of the whole group, you know, and it's just so beautiful. So yeah, so August, you can find all of the information on petercrone.com. And then if that isn't something people want to do, I have my Freedom membership now, which is, we made it super affordable, $29 a month for over, I think, 80 hours of content and $8,000 worth of programming.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
good.
So that's sort of the low hanging fruit if people don't want to do the mastermind. But if you can do it, it's the most powerful thing I offer.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for working through some stuff with me today. And
of course.
I'll report back on my next run.
Yeah. See you next month.
It's all good. Yeah, exactly. I'll see you next month.
Yeah, no, just let me know. Keep me posted. But again, the thing to understand is there's nothing wrong. And you don't know where this is going. And just to be responsible, not in a way that informs guilt or shame, but go, oh, wow, I'm so immensely powerful that what I've created through my own perceived sense of inadequacy and the way that I relate to others, there's such immense pressure that I'm putting on myself that is completely and utterly unnecessary. Being me is enough. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Heal with Kelly podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. Oh, and if you found this episode inspiring, please rate, review, and share Heal with Kelly so that we can grow our audience and reach more people. We truly appreciate it. Lots of love.